Welcome back, everyone. Continuing on Conklin and Company this morning with U.S. Senator from Ohio, Senator Rob Portman. And Senator, let's go back to Monday of this past week, the mass shooting at the Navy Yard. You're in the Senate building that day, and it goes into lockdown. And maybe from your perspective, tell us what was happening from your end.
Well, security people thought it might have been a terrorist act in the sense that there was, more than one shooter, and it was coordinated. It turned out it was one shooter. It was a guy who actually had a security clearance, reservist, and so the shutdown, the lockdown in the Capitol probably was not necessary, but they thought at that time that there might have been a couple other shooters on the loose. And it's only, 5 minutes from the Capitol. Here's my concern about all this. One, terrible tragedy, and for those families, our hearts go out to them, and obviously we need to look at the mental health issues and other issues related to that. But how did this guy get a security clearance is the thing that I have been
Number
asking.
one question that everybody asked, Senator, a guy who had how many incidents of misconduct while he was in the Navy?
Many.
Then he becomes the Navy contractor. And with that, you've sent a letter to the Office of Personnel Management saying, hey, how did we vet this guy? Essentially, right?
Yeah. I'm the top Republican on the subcommittee of government affairs that looks
Homeland
at security
Security,
clearances.
right.
So we had introduced legislation after the Snowden incident saying we need to have a way to tighten up these security clearances. How did Snowden, this is the guy that leaked all the classified information, how did he get a security clearance? And we had a good hearing on it. We dragged people up to the Capitol, put them on the spot. We didn't get satisfactory answers, so we introduced this legislation, bipartisan. Tester from Montana is the chairman. I'm the ranking Republican. Then this happens. We find out it's the same contractor that
same
did
agency, right?
the security clearance. So they're contracting out the security clearance process to people who have an interest in pushing these people through, probably to get paid on the basis of how many clearances they do, not how thorough they are. And obviously we're in a situation we can't afford that, whether it's classified information or getting access to a military installation to commit this kind of horrific act.
What is the repercussion on this vetting arm that says to Ed Snowden, you're okay, and to Aaron Alexis, you're okay?
Yeah. Well, one thing, that particular group ought to be fired in my view. But look, more importantly, we've got to figure out how do you come up with a system to vet people that provides the incentives, if you're going to do it with private contractors, so that they actually do a thorough job and you do a full analysis. We're told of examples, for instance, where they go ahead and push people through just because they've met a time deadline rather than having done the interviews. And look, it's a painstaking process. I know it's costly, but it's important to have it for someone who has access to the kind of classified material that Snowden did, or somebody who obviously has access to a federal facility like this. You got to be sure that everyth's covered. And this guy had mental health history.
Clearly, some instability, and that goes to my next question, Senator. I think your record on gun background checks is well documented. You've taken a lot of heat from the left on that. Does it go when this man's allowed to buy a gun on Sunday in Virginia, and then does what he did allegedly, or what he did on Monday? Does it give you pause to revisit your stance that he was able to go to a retail gun store and purchase guns and ammunition?
Well, he should have been stopped. I mean, I support background checks. I support having the mental health information in those background checks. Apparently that information was not there. That's why I've supported legislation to say, let's get the state information into the national system.
You support more comprehensive checks to include mental health?
Yeah, I do. And I think we should get the mental health information into the system that's already required but not being provided. In other words, if there is mental health information in the system and you're a gun dealer, whether you're at a gun show or at a retail store, you have to block somebody, and there have been a lot of people blocked. By the way, there have been no prosecutions at all, almost no prosecutions at all of those blocks, which is another problem. So,
what about the misconduct with the guns while he was in the Navy? Should those checks be expanded to include that information in the database as well?
Yeah, I don't know the details of that, but my understanding is that he had an incident when he was in the Navy where he used his weapon inappropriately, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's frankly, a real huge disagreement on that, but people wanted to expand the background checks into private sales. That's the issue with the so-called Toomey Mansion legislation. And the question of whether that's going to make any difference. If you talk to people who are behind bars, that's not how they get their guns. Less than
many of them.
1% got it from a flea market or a gun show, apparently. So the issue is, to me, how do you make the system work better, tighten up the background checks? I do support that. I also support, though, dealing with the underlying problem, one of mental health, which is a broader problem, and two, as you know, I've been very involved, including here in Toledo, on issues like human trafficking and drug demand reduction and second chance. That's my bill that I'm trying to reauthorize right now. That's taking ex-offenders who commit a lot of these crimes, unfortunately. It's a relatively small group of people who are committing most of these gun crimes. If you look at it in Ohio right now, it's a very small group that are repeat offenders. So getting those people behind bars, keeping them behind bars, those that come out, providing them the kind of reentry tools to be able to get the mental health treatment, to get the drug treatment, to get the job training, to get the housing, to be able to reintegrate into society, I think is part of the underlying problem here. It's also gangs, it's also drugs. That's why I do a lot of work on this drug prevention front. So I am very engaged in this issue, maybe more at a more underlying area, and that's why I'm a little frustrated when particularly some of the folks stand up and say, you know, this Toomey Manchin legislation on background checks to private sales is going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve the problem.
But you understand the question in this particular case,
sure.
Involving Aaron and Alexis.
Sure.
I want to talk about Lake Erie. It's so near and dear to us from a recreational standpoint and from an economic standpoint. You're out on the lake a couple of weeks ago on a fishing trip, and you gather a bunch of scientists, and you guys have a roundtable. Well, you fish for a while, and then you have a roundtable discussion about what we're facing. And I think the Asian carp dominates a lot of the headlines, but also algae blooms, which are a problem in this area, no question, whether it be from phosphorus or agriculture runoff or hot and humid weather, what have you. So first one, how are we going to keep the Asian carp out of here? Because DNA has already been found in some of the Great Lakes.
This is a treasure. Our Great Lake of Lake Erie is a particular treasure. They all are. By the way, the biggest source of fresh water in the world, which is, as you know, a valuable commodity and increasingly valuable. We've got to treasure it. We also have about a $6 billion recreational and commercial fishing industry in the Great Lakes. I mean, this is a huge economic issue for us. And so I have spent a lot of time on it. George Voinovich, who was my predecessor, helped me get involved back in the old days when I was in the House representing Southern Ohio, just to say this is important to Ohio, and he was right. And so, the trip was terrific because I was out in the lake fishing, which is always fun, and I love to fish, but I was out there to see it firsthand. So, I was catching zebra mussels, and I was catching these little minnows that are also invasive species, and I was getting all the scientific reasons.
Where's the walleye?
Yeah, right? I didn't do very well with the walleye. I did catch one, but look, it's a beautiful lake. It is obviously very fertile. It's also almost like a magnet for invasive species, and that's why I'm really concerned about the carp. So we've got legislation to get the Army Corps of Engineers to do what they should have done already, which is to issue a report of what you could block, particularly in the Chicago area.
The canal there, right?
Yeah, and we've got to be
Some
able to block
electronic
that.
blockade is there already.
We've got one there. Actually, the electricity went out for a while, so they're not sure how much of that electric shock was effective. But we also forced them to expand it to look at other tributaries. The Maumee is one, by the way. I mean, this is apparently a potential problem because the carp could be spawning up here. It's unfortunate, but our lake is it's so fertile that it could be very attractive, and the carp could come in and ruin our fishing overnight. So we're working on that. Algae bloom, also filed bipartisan legislation on that to try to focus on the science and mitigation efforts on freshwater. They've done a lot on saltwater, but we've got a big algae bloom in Lake Erie too.
Yeah, Lake Erie, and I think people who live in Salina know about Grand Lake St. Mary's. What a nightmare that was for a number of years. Time is of the essence. Senator Portman, thank you for addressing all those issues, and best of luck to your Reds.
Thank
you.
We
work our way toward the stretch, and maybe the Tigers can meet the Reds in the World Series. We'll see.
Hoping to have Detroit-Cincinnati World Series.
We'll see what happens.
Right.
Senator Rob Portman. When we come back in just a minute, a salute to Kaylee Halko and Carly Cudzia. Back in a minute.